I discovered the tire tracks cutting across my lawn on a Tuesday morning in March, deep ruts carved into the grass that had just started turning green after the long Colorado winter. My property sat on 15 acres outside Boulder, tucked into the foothills with a private road that ran from the main highway up to my house. The road wasn't much to look at, just gravel and dirt that I maintained myself, but it was mine according to the property deed, and those tracks told me someone had been using it without permission. My name is Xavier Jennings, and I'd bought this place 3 years ago specifically for the privacy. I worked from home as a software consultant, and the isolation suited me perfectly. The property came with an easement that allowed access to the state land behind my acreage for hiking and hunting, but that easement didn't give anyone the right to drive across my front lawn or use my road as a personal highway. I followed the tracks with my eyes, noticing how they bypassed the proper turn onto my road and cut straight through, heading toward the cluster of houses that made up the Ponderosa Ridge HOA development on the other side of my property. The development had gone up about 5 years before I bought my land, and while I wasn't part of their HOA, thank God, I'd heard stories from the folks at the hardware store about how strict the board was. Apparently, they'd fine you for leaving your trash cans out too long or painting your mailbox the wrong shade of beige. I grabbed my jacket and decided to follow the tracks on foot. The March air was crisp, and patches of snow still lingered in the shadows. The tracks led exactly where I suspected, cutting through a section of my property that bordered the HOA development. Someone had been using my private road to shave about 10 minutes off their commute into Boulder, avoiding the longer route that wound around the development and connected to the highway properly. When I reached the edge of my property, I saw where the tracks emerged onto one of the HOA streets. A woman was standing in her driveway, loading grocery bags into a silver Lexus SUV. She was probably in her late 40s, with blonde hair styled in that particular way that screamed, "I'd like to speak to the manager." She wore expensive-looking athleisure wear, the kind that had never seen the inside of an actual gym. "Excuse me," I called out, walking toward her. "Do you know anything about vehicles cutting through my property?" She turned, and her expression immediately shifted to annoyance. "Your property? That's a public access road." "No, it's not. It's a private road on my private property. The deed is very clear about that." She set down her grocery bag with more force than necessary. "I'm Deborah Anderson, HOA president of Ponderosa Ridge. That road has been used by our residents for years. It provides necessary access." "Access to what?" "You have your own roads that connect to the highway. That route adds 15 minutes to our commute. The previous owner never had a problem with residents using the shortcut." I felt my jaw tighten. The previous owner sold the property to me 3 years ago, and whether he minded or not, it's my property now. And I do mind, especially when people are tearing up my lawn. Deborah crossed her arms. "We're not tearing up anything. We're simply using an established route. An established route across private property without permission. That's called trespassing." "Oh, please," she rolled her eyes dramatically. "Don't be one of those property owners who gets precious about a little bit of traffic. We're a community here. We look out for each other. I'm not part of your community. I'm not in your HOA." "Clearly," she said, her eyes scanning my worn jeans and work jacket with obvious disdain. "But that doesn't mean you can just cut off access that residents have been using for years. There's such a thing as common courtesy." I took a deep breath, trying to keep my temper in check. "Common courtesy would be asking permission before driving across someone's property. I'm asking politely that you and your residents stop using my road. And I'm telling you that's not going to happen. Take it up with a lawyer if you want, but I think you'll find that established use creates certain rights." She picked up her grocery bag again. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have things to do." She climbed into her Lexus and backed out of the driveway, and I noticed she turned in the direction that would take her toward my property. I walked back along the tire tracks, already pulling out my phone to call a lawyer. The attorney I spoke with, a woman named Patricia Chen who specialized in property law, listened to my situation and gave me straightforward advice. Established use can sometimes create an implied easement, but 3 years isn't typically long enough, especially if you were never asked for permission and never explicitly granted it. However, if the previous owner allowed it, they might argue prescriptive easement, though that usually requires at least 18 years in Colorado. So what do I do? Document everything. Put up no trespassing signs. Send a formal cease and desist letter to the HOA board. If they continue, you can pursue legal action for trespassing. And if you want to prevent access entirely, you might consider a physical barrier. That afternoon, I went to the hardware store in Boulder and bought a dozen large, no trespassing private property signs. I posted them along my road and at the points where the tire tracks entered and exited my land. Then, I spent the evening drafting a formal letter to the Ponderosa Ridge HOA board, outlining that my private road was not for public use and demanding that residents cease trespassing immediately. I sent the letter certified mail the next day. Then, I waited. 3 days later, I was working in my home office when I heard the crunch of tires on gravel. I looked out the window and saw Deborah's silver Lexus driving up my road, heading toward the shortcut. She wasn't alone. A dark blue BMW followed behind her, then a red Honda CR-V. They drove right past my no trespassing signs like they didn't exist. I grabbed my phone and started recording, stepping outside to capture clear footage of the vehicles on my property. When Deborah's Lexus came back through about an hour later, presumably returning from Boulder, I stood in the middle of the road and flagged her down. She stopped and rolled down her window, looking annoyed. "What now?" "You received my letter." "I did. The board met and discussed it. We've decided that your claims have no merit. The road access stays. This isn't your decision to make. It's my property." "Mr. Jennings, let me explain something to you." Her voice took on that condescending tone people use when they think they're smarter than you. "Ponderosa Ridge is a planned community with property values exceeding $3 million per home. Your little ranch here, while quaint, doesn't get to dictate terms that affect our residents' quality of life. The shortcut through your property is convenient for 18 families. That's 18 families whose time and convenience outweigh your petty territorial instincts. My petty territorial instincts are backed up by a property deed in Colorado law. Sue me then." She revved her engine slightly. "Now move or I'll consider this harassment." I stepped aside, and she drove past. The BMW and CR-V followed. I stood there in the dust, anger burning in my chest, but I also felt a strange sort of satisfaction. She'd just made this a whole lot easier for me. That evening, I called Patricia Chen again and sent her the video footage. She was impressed with my documentation and agreed to file a lawsuit for trespassing and injunctive relief. "This is going to cost you," she warned. "HOAs can be stubborn, and they usually have legal funds built into their dues." "I don't care. They can't just take what's not theirs." Over the next 2 weeks, the traffic on my road actually increased. It was like Deborah had told everyone to use the shortcut as often as possible, just to spite me. I documented every vehicle, every time. I had hours of footage showing HOA residents clearly ignoring the no trespassing signs and using my property as their personal highway. The lawsuit was filed in Boulder County Court, and the HOA was served. I expected them to back down once things got official, but I'd underestimated Deborah's stubbornness. The HOA hired their own attorney, a slick guy named Marcus Webb, who sent me a letter claiming that my lawsuit was frivolous and that I was harassing his clients. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for late April. In the meantime, I started researching physical barriers. I couldn't just chain off the road because I still needed to use it myself, and emergency vehicles needed access. But there had to be something I could do to make it clear that the shortcut was closed. That's when I discovered stone walls. Not decorative garden walls, but serious property barriers. I contacted a local masonry company, Rocky Mountain Stoneworks, and they came out to survey the land. The owner, a weathered man in his 60s named Frank, walked the property line with me. "You want to close off this access here?" He pointed to where the tire tracks came through. "Completely. But I need to maintain access to my own road for emergency vehicles and for the hiking easement that goes to the state land behind my property." Frank nodded, pulling out a measuring tape. "We can build you a stone wall along this entire section, about 4 feet high, solid construction. Put in a proper gate with a lock where your road comes through. That way you control access." "How long would it take?" 3 weeks, maybe 4. It's a good-sized job, probably 200 feet of wall." "How much?" He did some calculations on his phone. "Materials and labor, you're looking at around $45,000. I winced, but nodded. "Let's do it." "You sure?" That's a lot of money for a spite wall. It's not spite, it's protecting my property rights. Frank grinned. Son, I've built a lot of walls in my 30 years. They're all spite walls, one way or another, but your money's as good as anyone's. I'll draw up a contract. We shook hands, and I signed the contract 2 days later. Frank and his crew would start work on May 1st, right after the preliminary hearing. I wanted to see what the judge said before committing to the expense, but I was already pretty sure how it would go. The day of the hearing arrived on a Thursday morning. The Boulder County Courthouse was busy with various cases, and I sat in the hallway outside the courtroom with Patricia, going over our arguments. Deborah showed up with Marcus Webb and 2 other HOA board members, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses, and a younger woman in an expensive suit. When our case was called, we all filed into the courtroom. Judge Michael Richardson presided, a stern-looking man in his 50s who had a reputation for no-nonsense rulings. Patricia presented our case efficiently, showing the property deed, the survey maps, and the video evidence of repeated trespassing. Marcus Webb argued that the HOA residents had been using the road for years with the implicit permission of the previous owner, and that my sudden prohibition created an undue burden on the community. Your Honor, Mr. Jennings purchased his property with full knowledge of the development next door and the traffic patterns that existed. To now claim exclusive use of a road that has functioned as a semi-public access route is unreasonable. Judge Richardson looked unimpressed. Was there any written easement granted by the previous owner? No, Your Honor, but established use. How many years? Marcus hesitated. Approximately 5 years, Your Honor. Colorado requires 18 years for prescriptive easement, Counselor. You know that. Yes, Your Honor. But there's also the doctrine of reasonable accommodation between neighbors. This isn't a matter of accommodation. This is a property rights issue. Judge Richardson looked at the video footage on his screen. I'm seeing clear documentation of trespassing after the plaintiff posted no trespassing signs and sent formal notice. Ms. Anderson, you're present in this courtroom today? Deborah stood up. Yes, Your Honor. You received Mr. Jennings's letter asking you to stop using his property? Yes, but Your Honor, if I may explain, simple yes or no, please. Yes. And you continued to use the property anyway? Deborah's jaw tightened. Our residents have used that route for years. That's not an answer to my question. Did you continue to use Mr. Jennings's property after being asked to stop? Yes. Judge Richardson made some notes. I'm granting the preliminary injunction. All Ponderosa Ridge HOA residents are hereby ordered to cease using Mr. Jennings's private road immediately. Violation of this order will result in contempt charges. A full trial is scheduled for July 15th to determine permanent injunctive relief and potential damages. Until then, the temporary injunction stands. He banged his gavel, and I felt relief wash over me. Patricia shook my hand. Good start, she said. As we walked out of the courtroom, Deborah caught up with me in the hallway. Her face was flushed with anger. You're making a huge mistake, she said. You have no idea who you're dealing with. I think I have a pretty good idea. Someone who thinks rules don't apply to them. Our residents are important people, lawyers, doctors, business owners. You're just some computer guy living in a rundown ranch house. This isn't over. Marcus Webb pulled her away, whispering something urgent in her ear. I watched them go, feeling both vindicated and uneasy. Something about her threat felt more serious than just legal posturing. That weekend, things escalated. On Saturday morning, I woke up to find that someone had spray-painted "asshole" across my no trespassing signs. On Sunday, I discovered nails scattered across my driveway, the kind that would definitely puncture a tire. I called the Boulder County Sheriff's Office and filed a report. Deputy Sarah Martinez came out to document everything. You think it's related to your lawsuit? She asked, photographing the vandalism. Has to be. This only started after the court hearing. We'll increase patrols in the area, but without witnesses or cameras catching someone in the act, there's not much we can do. I decided to install security cameras. I spent Monday setting up a system with 6 cameras covering my driveway, the road, and the areas where the tire tracks had been cutting through. If someone was going to keep harassing me, I'd have evidence. On Tuesday, May 1st, Frank and his crew arrived at 7 in the morning with trucks full of stone and masonry equipment. They started at the western edge of my property where the shortcut had been most used, digging foundations for the wall. The work was loud and disruptive, but I felt a deep satisfaction watching it begin. By the end of the first day, they had the foundation laid for about 50 feet of wall. By the end of the first week, the wall was taking shape, a beautiful construction of Colorado stone that looked like it had been there for 100 years. It was solid, 4 feet high, and absolutely impassable for vehicles. That's when Deborah showed up. I was outside talking to Frank about the gate installation when her Lexus pulled up to where the wall now blocked the shortcut. She got out and marched toward us, her face red. "What the hell is this?" she shouted. "A wall," I said calmly, "on my property." "You can't do this." "Actually, I can. It's my land." "This is harassment. This is retaliation for the lawsuit." Frank spoke up, his voice level. "Madam, we're building a property boundary wall. Nothing illegal about it." "I'll have this torn down. The HOA won't stand for this." "The HOA has no authority over my property," I said. "You might want to start using the proper road like everyone else." She pointed her finger at me, her hand shaking with rage. "You have no idea what you've done. This isn't just about a shortcut anymore. You've declared war on this community and you're going to lose." She stormed back to her car and drove away, tires spinning on the gravel. Frank watched her go and let out a low whistle. "That lady's got some anger issues. You have no idea." Over the next 2 weeks, the harassment increased. Someone slashed my mailbox with what looked like a machete. My trash cans were tipped over repeatedly, garbage strewn across my driveway. Someone even left a dead raccoon on my porch. But now I had cameras, and on May 15th, they caught something interesting. At 2 in the morning, a dark sedan pulled up to my property. 2 figures got out, both wearing hoodies, and started spray painting more profanity on my new wall. The cameras caught clear footage of their faces when one of them pulled back their hood to wipe sweat from his forehead. I recognized him immediately. He was the thin man with wire-rimmed glasses who'd been at the court hearing, one of the HOA board members. I called Deputy Martinez immediately. She came out the next morning and reviewed the footage. "That's definitely enough for vandalism charges. Do you know who he is?" "His name's Gerald something. He's on the HOA board with Deborah Anderson." "I'll bring him in for questioning." Gerald was arrested 2 days later. His name was Gerald Preston, and he was a tax attorney who lived in one of the larger homes in Ponderosa Ridge. When questioned, he claimed he'd acted alone, that Deborah had nothing to do with it. But I didn't believe that for a second. Patricia Chen had a different take on it. Whether Deborah ordered it or not, this shows a pattern of harassment from HOA board members. We can use this in the civil case to show bad faith and potentially get punitive damages. The wall was completed on May 20th. Frank's crew installed a beautiful iron gate where my road entered the property with a keypad lock that I could control remotely. The wall itself was a masterpiece, solid and imposing, making it absolutely clear where my property line was. The shortcut was permanently closed. I stood admiring the work when my phone rang. It was Patricia. "Xavier, you need to hear this. I just got a call from Marcus Webb. The HOA wants to settle." "Settle? After everything they've done?" "They're offering $25,000 for your legal fees and damages, plus a written agreement that they'll stop all harassment and acknowledge your property rights." "What's the catch?" "No admission of wrongdoing by Deborah personally. The HOA takes responsibility as an organization, but she walks away clean." I thought about it. "No deal. I want her specifically to acknowledge what she did." "Xavier, that might mean going to trial. That's expensive and time-consuming." "I don't care. She threatened me, encouraged her residents to trespass, and probably ordered the vandalism even if we can't prove it. I want accountability." Patricia sighed. "All right. I'll tell them we're going to trial." The tension over the next few weeks was palpable. More cameras caught HOA residents driving by my property slowly, taking pictures of the wall. Some left angry notes in my mailbox, accusing me of being a bad neighbor and ruining the community. One note said, "You'll regret this, you selfish prick." But something else was happening too. I started receiving messages of support from people who'd had their own battles with the Ponderosa Ridge HOA. A couple named Tom and Linda Shaw reached out via Facebook, telling me they'd been fined $15,000 for painting their front door navy blue instead of the approved slate blue. They'd fought it and eventually settled, but they were still bitter. Dada's Pietro. Deborah Anderson is a tyrant, Linda told me over coffee at a Boulder cafe. She uses the HOA like her personal fiefdom. Board meetings are a joke because she controls all the votes. We've been trying to get her removed for 2 years, but she's got enough allies among the wealthier residents. Why do people put up with it? Most of them don't care. They travel a lot, or they're too busy with work to attend meetings. As long as their property values stay high, they let Deborah do whatever she wants. This gave me an idea. If Deborah was as controlling and difficult as Linda described, there had to be other people in the HOA who were tired of her leadership. Maybe the lawsuit could be an opportunity to expose her behavior more broadly. I asked Patricia if we could subpoena HOA, meeting minutes and financial records as part of discovery. She agreed, and when we served the subpoena in early June, Marcus Webb fought it hard. That told me we were onto something. Judge Richardson ordered the HOA to comply with discovery. When the documents arrived, Patricia and I spent days going through them. What we found was enlightening. Deborah had been using HOA funds to pay for personal legal battles, including a dispute with her ex-husband. She'd approved contracts with companies owned by her brother-in-law without disclosing the conflict of interest. She'd fined residents selectively, going hard on people she didn't like while letting her friends slide on violations. This is embezzlement, Patricia said, highlighting a series of transactions. She's been siphoning HOA funds for years, probably close to $100,000. Can we use this in court? Absolutely. This goes beyond trespassing now. This shows a pattern of abuse of authority and illegal activity. We filed an amended complaint adding allegations of fraud and conspiracy. We also sent copies of our findings to the HOA residents, all 215 households, letting them know what their president had been doing with their money. The response was immediate and dramatic. Within 3 days, an emergency HOA meeting was called. Linda Shaw kept me updated via text messages from inside the meeting. Deborah tried to control the narrative, claiming the documents were taken out of context and that I was waging a smear campaign, but too many residents had seen the evidence. A vote of no confidence was called. Deborah was removed as HOA president by a margin of 68-12. The board voted to cooperate fully with the lawsuit and to have an independent audit performed on the HOA finances. Marcus Webb withdrew as the HOA's attorney, and a new lawyer, a woman named Jennifer Holt, reached out to Patricia. My clients want to settle this quickly and cleanly, Jennifer said. They're appalled by what Mrs. Anderson did, both regarding your client's property and the financial mismanagement. The new settlement offer was substantial. $50,000 in damages, full reimbursement of all legal fees, a formal written apology acknowledging my property rights, and a commitment that the HOA would ensure no resident ever used my property without permission again. Additionally, the HOA would pursue its own legal action against Deborah for the embezzled funds. I accepted. The settlement was finalized in late June, and the lawsuit was dismissed. But the story wasn't over yet. In early July, the independent audit confirmed what we'd found and more. Deborah had taken nearly $150,000 from HOA accounts over a 4-year period. The HOA board filed a criminal complaint with the Boulder County District Attorney's Office. Deborah was charged with embezzlement, theft, and fraud. I watched from a distance as her life unraveled. Her husband filed for divorce. The house in Ponderosa Ridge went up for sale. She was facing up to 6 years in prison if convicted. Deputy Martinez called me in August to let me know they'd also charged her in connection with the vandalism. Gerald Preston, facing his own charges, had agreed to cooperate and testified that Deborah had specifically asked him to make Xavier Jennings regret his decision. She'd provided the spray paint and even driven him to my property that night, though she'd stayed in the car. She's looking at additional charges for conspiracy to commit vandalism and intimidation, Deputy Martinez said. With her record now, the DA's pushing for actual prison time, not just probation. The trial happened in October. I attended as a witness, testifying about the harassment and trespassing. Deborah's attorney tried to paint her as a dedicated community volunteer who'd made some mistakes with bookkeeping, but the evidence was overwhelming. The jury found her guilty on all counts after just 4 hours of deliberation. Judge Richardson sentenced her in November, 4 years in prison for the embezzlement charges, plus 1 year for the vandalism conspiracy, to be served consecutively. 5 years total, with possibility of parole after 3. I sat in the courtroom and watched as Deborah was led away in handcuffs. She'd looked smaller somehow during the trial, less imposing, but I still saw that same stubborn anger in her eyes as she glanced back at the gallery. She'd never accepted that she was wrong, not about the road, not about the money, not about anything. Life returned to normal after that, or as normal as it could be. The wall became a point of pride for me, a beautiful boundary marker that made it clear where my property began and ended. I never had another problem with trespassing. The new HOA board was respectful and professional, and several residents even apologized personally for the trouble Deborah had caused. Frank stopped by in December to check on the wall and make sure everything had settled properly through the winter freeze-thaw cycle. We stood looking at his work, the stone weathered now like it had always been part of the landscape. "You know," he said, "I've built a lot of walls in my career, but this one's my favorite." "Why's that?" "Because it meant something. Most of the time, people want walls for decoration or property value. This one was about standing up for what's right. That matters." I agreed with him completely. The stone wall stood solid through that winter and the next spring, a permanent reminder that property rights matter, that boundaries exist for a reason, and that no amount of entitlement or convenience justifies taking what isn't yours. The shortcut was gone forever, blocked by tons of Colorado stone, and my private road remained exactly that private. On quiet mornings, I'd drink my coffee on the porch and look at that wall, feeling satisfied. Deborah Anderson had tried to bully me into giving up my rights, had harassed me, had broken the law, and in the end, she'd lost everything. Not because I was vindictive, but because actions have consequences, and eventually, justice catches up with people who think they're above the rules. The hiking easement to the state land still existed, of course. I'd never blocked that. People could park at the designated area and walk through the gate I'd installed specifically for that purpose. It was never about preventing legitimate access. It was about respect, boundaries, and the fundamental right to control your own property. Word spread through Boulder County about the case. I got calls from other property owners dealing with similar issues, people whose neighbors or nearby developments were encroaching on their land. I shared Patricia Chen's contact information and told them my story. Some fights are worth fighting, even when they're expensive and stressful. Some principles are worth defending. Linda Shaw and her husband Tom became good friends. They'd eventually moved out of Ponderosa Ridge, tired of the HOA politics even after Deborah's removal. We'd have dinner sometimes, and they'd update me on the development's news. The new HOA board was far more reasonable, focused on actual community maintenance rather than petty power plays. Property values had actually increased after Deborah's removal, once the scandal died down. Turned out that having a criminal as your HOA president wasn't great for real estate. Gerald Preston took a plea deal for his vandalism charges, receiving probation and community service. He resigned from the HOA board and kept a low profile. I saw him once at a hardware store, and he quickly turned and walked the other way. I didn't blame him. What do you say to someone you spray-painted profanity against at 2 a.m? The settlement money helped offset the cost of the wall, and I invested the rest. My software consulting business continued to thrive, and the privacy I'd originally moved here for was restored. No more traffic cutting through at all hours, no more tire tracks on my lawn, no more stress about protecting my property from entitled neighbors. Spring came around again, and I hired a landscaping company to repair the damage the trespassing vehicles had caused. They reseeded the lawn, fixed the rutted areas, and planted some native wildflowers along the wall. By summer, you couldn't tell there had ever been tire tracks cutting through. I was working in my office one afternoon in June when I got a call from Patricia Chen. "Xavier, I thought you'd want to know. Deborah Anderson's parole hearing was denied." "She was up for parole already?" "Early review based on good behavior claims, but the board denied it. She'll serve at least another year before they reconsider." How'd you find out? The victims in financial crimes get notified of parole hearings. The HOA is technically the victim in her case, and the board keeps me updated since I represented you in the related civil case. I appreciate you letting me know. Also, I heard through the legal grapevine that her ex-husband won full custody of their kids. She'd been fighting it from prison, but the judge ruled against her. I felt a strange mix of emotions hearing that. Part of me felt satisfied that justice was being served, but part of me just felt sad about the whole situation. Deborah had destroyed her own life over stubbornness and greed. Her kids were growing up with their mother in prison. Her marriage was over. Her reputation was ruined, all because she couldn't accept the simple fact that my road was mine, not hers. It didn't have to be this way, I said to Patricia. No, it didn't. But she made her choices. That was true. At every step, Deborah had options. She could have respected my initial request to stop trespassing. She could have negotiated an actual easement agreement. She could have accepted the court's preliminary injunction. She could have not embezzled HOA funds. She could have not ordered vandalism of my property. Each choice led to the next, each bad decision compounding until there was no way back. I thought about what Frank had said about the wall being meaningful. He was right, but it was meaningful in ways I hadn't expected when I'd commissioned it. The wall wasn't just a physical barrier, it was a symbol of boundaries, of respect, of the importance of property rights in a functioning society. It represented the idea that no one, no matter how entitled or connected or wealthy, gets to take what isn't theirs. The summer passed peacefully. I took up hiking more seriously, using the trails that led from my property into the state land. The mountains were beautiful, and the solitude was exactly what I needed after the stress of the lawsuit. I met other hikers sometimes, people who used the proper easement access through my gate. They were always respectful, closing the gate behind them, staying on the trail. That's all I'd ever asked for. In August, Tom Shaw called me. Xavier, you're not going to believe this, but the HOA is trying to get people to donate money to help offset the losses from Deborah's embezzlement. Are people actually donating? Some are, but there's a big fight brewing because some residents think the board should have caught the embezzlement earlier. They want the insurance to cover it. Do they have insurance for that? They're trying to find out. The policies are complicated, but yeah, it's a whole mess. I'm glad we moved out when we did. I was glad too. The drama of HOA politics seemed exhausting. I appreciated more than ever that my property was independent, that I answered to no board, paid no dues, and dealt with no neighborhood busybodies trying to tell me what color to paint my house. Fall brought the first snow, dusting the wall and making it look even more like a natural part of the landscape. I'd planted some climbing vines along sections of it, and they'd taken hold nicely, softening the stark stone with greenery. The wall had become beautiful as well as functional. One October morning, I was surprised to see a car pull up to the gate. A woman got out, probably in her early 30s, and rang the intercom I'd installed. I answered from inside the house. Hello? Hi, my name is Rachel Preston. I'm Gerald Preston's daughter. Could I speak with you for a moment? I was curious enough to agree. I walked down to the gate and met her there. She had her father's thin build but a warmer demeanor. Mr. Jennings, I wanted to apologize in person for what my dad did. The vandalism, the harassment, all of it. You don't need to apologize for his actions. I know, but I feel like I should. He was caught up in Deborah Anderson's manipulation, but that doesn't excuse it. He made his own choices. He's told me he wants to apologize to you himself, but he's too ashamed. I appreciate you coming here, Rachel. Your father paid his debt through the legal system. I don't hold grudges. That means a lot. Also, I wanted you to know that there are people in Ponderosa Ridge who are grateful for what you did. My dad told me how Deborah was running things, how corrupt it all was. You exposing that helped a lot of families. We talked for a few more minutes, and she left with a handshake and a genuine smile. It was a surprising encounter, but a welcome one. It reminded me that the situation had never been about everyone in the HOA, just about one person's abuse of power. The lawsuit had made local news, and occasionally I'd get recognized at the grocery store or at restaurants in Boulder. Most people were supportive, sharing their own HOA horror stories or congratulating me for standing my ground. A few people seemed to think I was the bad guy, that I should have just shared the road and not made waves. I didn't let those opinions bother me. Property rights weren't up for popular vote. Winter settled in properly, and the wall proved its worth in another way. It acted as a windbreak, reducing the brutal gusts that used to whip across that section of my property. My heating bills actually went down slightly. Frank had built better than he knew. I spent Christmas alone but content, cooking a good meal and video calling with my sister in California. She'd followed the whole saga from afar and kept joking that I should write a book about it. "People love stories about standing up to petty tyrants," she said. "I'm not much of a writer." "Then hire someone. I'm telling you, Xavier, this is the kind of thing people want to hear about." I dismissed the idea at the time, but it stuck with me. Maybe there was value in documenting what had happened, not for fame or money, but as a cautionary tale about the importance of knowing your rights and being willing to defend them. The new year brought new snow and new routines. I'd started dating someone, a teacher named Andrea, who lived in Boulder proper. She found the whole wall story both amusing and impressive. "You built a spite wall," she teased. "That's the most petty and amazing thing I've ever heard." "It wasn't spite, it was necessity." Sure. Whatever helps you sleep at night." But she understood, really. She'd had her own battles with difficult people and appreciated that sometimes you had to take a hard line to be taken seriously. In February, I got another call from Patricia Chen. "Xavier, Deborah Anderson is being released early. Budget cuts at the state prison level. She's done 3 years, and they're releasing non-violent offenders to reduce overcrowding." "Is she coming back to Boulder?" "I don't think so. As part of her parole terms, she has to pay restitution to the HOA, and she's banned from serving on any HOA board in Colorado. Last I heard, she was moving to Arizona to live with her sister." "That's probably for the best." "I thought you should know, just in case. Though honestly, I don't think she'll bother you. She lost everything fighting this battle. I doubt she wants round 2. Patricia was right. Deborah never came near my property again. I heard through the grapevine that she'd moved to Phoenix and was working as an office manager at a dental practice. Her kids visited her occasionally, but the relationship was strained. She'd become a cautionary tale in Boulder County, the HOA president who'd gone too far and paid the price. The stone wall remained, solid and permanent, a monument to boundaries respected and defended. The shortcut was gone forever, reclaimed by native grasses and wildflowers. My private road stayed private, used only by me and the occasional authorized vehicle. Time moved on. Spring turned to summer, summer to fall. The cycles of seasons passed and the drama faded into memory. The wall weathered beautifully, the stone taking on the character that only time and weather can provide. The climbing vines I'd planted grew thicker, and birds nested in the spaces between stones. I'd stand on my porch sometimes with my morning coffee, looking at that wall, and feel a deep sense of satisfaction. Not because I'd won some petty battle, but because I'd stood up for something that mattered. Property rights, personal boundaries, the rule of law. These aren't abstract concepts, they're the foundation of a functioning society. Deborah Anderson had thought she could ignore those principles because she was used to getting her way. She'd been HOA president for years, wielding power over her little kingdom, and she genuinely believed that her convenience mattered more than my rights. She'd been wrong, and the wall stood as proof of that fact. Andrea moved in with me eventually, in the late spring. She loved the property, loved the privacy, and loved the wall. "It's like a castle fortification," she said. "You're defending your realm. From entitled soccer moms in luxury SUVs. The most dangerous enemy of all." We laughed about it, but there was truth underneath the humor. The most frustrating battles aren't always against obvious villains. Sometimes they're against ordinary people who think rules don't apply to them, who believe their convenience trumps your rights, who can't imagine that no means no. The wall taught me something important about boundaries. They have to be clear, they have to be enforced, and you can't apologize for maintaining them. If I'd been wishy-washy about the trespassing, if I'd let it slide sometimes but not others, the situation would never have been resolved. But by being absolutely clear, this is my property, you cannot use it without permission, I'd forced the issue to a conclusion. Years passed. The wall became just another feature of the property, as natural as the trees and rocks. New people moved into Ponderosa Ridge, people who'd never known Deborah Anderson or the drama of the lawsuit. They knew only that there was a beautiful stone wall marking the boundary, and that the property beyond it was private. Occasionally, I'd get asked about it. Why such a serious wall? A new neighbor might ask, and I'd tell them the story, usually a shortened version that hit the main points. Some people seemed to think I'd overreacted. Most understood completely. The gate at the entrance to my road developed a reputation. People hiking to the state land knew to use the pedestrian access, to close the gate properly, to respect the property. I never had another problem with trespassers. The cameras stayed up, but they mostly recorded wildlife, deer, elk, the occasional black bear passing through. Andrea and I got married in a small ceremony on the property, with the stone wall serving as a backdrop for photos. Frank came to the wedding, proud to see his work celebrated. Linda and Tom Shaw were there too, along with Patricia Chen and Deputy Martinez, who'd become unlikely friends through the whole ordeal. During the reception, Frank raised his glass for a toast. "To boundaries," he said. "May they always be clear, may they always be respected, and may they always stand firm." Everyone cheered, and I felt the weight of those words. The wall wasn't just about keeping people out. It was about defining space, about making clear what was mine and what wasn't, about establishing order in a world that often felt chaotic. The years continued to pass peacefully. I expanded my software consulting business, hiring a few remote employees. Andrea got a promotion to assistant principal. We talked about kids, about growing old on this property, about building a life within the boundaries I'd fought so hard to protect. The stone wall stood through every season, every year, unchanging and solid. Snow piled against it in winter. Wildflowers bloomed at its base in spring, vines climbed it in summer, leaves drifted against it in fall. It became part of the landscape, as permanent as the mountains themselves. Sometimes I'd walk along the wall, running my hand over the stone, feeling the rough texture and the solid mass of it. This wall had cost me money, time, and stress. It had been the focal point of legal battles and personal attacks, but it had been worth every penny, every moment, every ounce of effort, because in the end, the wall represented something more important than convenience or shortcuts or neighborly accommodation. It represented the principle that people's rights matter, that boundaries deserve respect, that the law protects those who stand up for themselves. Deborah Anderson had used my private road for years, treating it like her personal property, like she had some inherent right to it simply because it was convenient. She'd been wrong, and when I'd pushed back, she'd escalated into harassment, vandalism, and intimidation. She'd broken the law repeatedly, embezzled funds, and abused her position of power. And in the end, she'd lost everything. The stone wall ended that shortcut forever. Not with violence, not with matching her level of hostility, but simply by existing, by being an immovable physical barrier that made clear where my property began and where everyone else's ended. There's something deeply satisfying about that kind of boundary. It doesn't argue or debate or compromise. It simply is. The wall stands, solid and permanent, a reminder that some things aren't negotiable, some rights aren't subject to majority vote, and some battles are worth fighting no matter the cost. I built that wall to stop trespassers, but it became something more. It became a statement, a principle made manifest in stone and mortar. It said, "This is mine. You cannot take it. The law protects me, and no amount of entitlement, manipulation, or harassment changes that fundamental truth." The shortcut was gone forever, and my private road remained exactly that private. The wall stood firm, weathering every storm, marking the boundary for all time, and that was exactly as it should be.